All right, I think I will get started. I think we're recording already. So hi everyone, thank you for joining the next BMEUSA Lunch and Learn. First, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of British Columbia's Biomedical Engineering Undergraduate Student Association is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And as engineering students and leaders, we acknowledge that the engineering, learning, and governance have been occurring at the site of our campus for millennia. I'd like to welcome the Praxis Spinal Cord Institute team and our three guest speakers for today, who I think will be James Heckner, the Regional Community Liaison for the BC Interior Region, Jessica Parsons, the National Clinical Liaison, and Andrew Forshner, the Commercialization and Partnerships Manager. We're all excited to have you here, and I will hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. And hello, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting us to speak today. We're really excited to speak to you about some of the partnerships and programs Praxis helps to support to drive innovation for people living with spinal cord injury. And inspire you to see how kind of biomedical engineering can ultimately improve the lives of those living with spinal cord injury, both in the clinical setting and at home. So today we've got presenting a slight change to the people presenting. So myself, Jessica Parsons, Adam Forshner, as we said, and then the difference to the subject to James Heckner would be Chris Marks, who's our regional consumer liaison. So I'll let Andrew and Chris introduce themselves in a second. But so my background is I work as a national clinical liaison for Praxis Spinal Cord Institute. I do also have a clinical background. So I work as a registered nurse on the acute spine program at Vancouver General Hospital. But I also, in my position at Praxis, really a kind of high-level overview of my role is providing kind of clinical direction and oversight into a lot of the projects that we do at Praxis. So that's my background, and I'll just hand you off to Andrew and Chris for them to introduce themselves.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew. I'm the Commercialization and Partnerships Manager at Praxis. My background is in business development and nonprofit development. So what I do at Praxis is really work with our university partners in delivering the programs that we offer and the opportunities we have for undergrad and graduate students on our commercialization side of how we take ideas into the marketplace.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I'm Chris Marks, so I'm the Vancouver Island Regional Liaison. So I'm over here in Victoria today. And so my background before injury, manufacturing, construction, trades, culinary and stuff. And at 31, I had a spinal injury. So at the C5 level, I had a first fracture. So I'm a tetraplegic, which means impairment in all four limbs. And AISC, which means I have some feeling and can wiggle a toe, but that's about it. And I've been with Praxis for a couple of years, and I'm interfacing daily with commercialization and all the projects we got going on. So excited to meet you guys today.
Thanks, Chris. So what we're going to cover in our kind of short session today is just present some facts around spinal cord injury and what is spinal cord injury. I'm going to give a bit of a short overview of what, who we are and what we do at Praxis. As well as our kind of overview of our collaboration with the UBC Biomedical Engineering Department through the Engineers and Scrub program. And then we thought it'd be really interesting to give our perspective from a clinical lens, consumer and commercialization perspective around the importance of biomedical engineering, but also the opportunities available to you guys. So what is a spinal cord injury? So a spinal cord injury is the impairment of sensory and or muscle and or autonomic function due to the damage of the nerves in the spinal cord. Now, if you think about the spinal cord as a series of electrical wires running from your brain, that is receiving information from the external environment and then transmitting that to your brain, and then signals coming from your brain and being delivered to the rest of your body, whether that's to the muscles or to your organs to help with functioning. If there's any sort of impairment or damage to those wires, then you are going to see kind of pretty much every system in your body affected. And that's really why we described spinal cord injury as one of the most traumatic injuries the body can sustain and still continue to live. Now, spinal cord injury has two different kind of etiologies. You can either have a traumatic spinal cord injury where you're you're hit from an external force or a blunt trauma, which then causes the damage to the spinal cord, or it can be an internal process, whether that's kind of congenital disease or infections or tumors. Those are the kind of two different types of spinal cord injury, but ultimately they result in the same effect in terms of sensory, motor, and autonomic deficit. The numbers around spinal cord injury: there is 86,000 Canadians living with spinal cord injury across Canada. Now, that number is actually relatively low compared to other chronic health conditions such as diabetes or heart failure, but actually the economic burden is substantially more, with those with newly sustained traumatic spinal cord injury having a bill of greater than 2.5 billion. And that's often because people with spinal cord injury have ongoing complications from not just from the initial injury, and require lifelong follow-up within the healthcare system. And some of these, aside from the physical changes, there's also impacts on employment, and then there's secondary health complications such as pressure injuries, UTIs, musculoskeletal injuries, and then with the autonomic dysfunction, you can have bowel and bladder issues, as well as cardiac and respiratory issues. So it's quite a complex picture, and it's not just always the physical, outward-facing disabilities that you can see someone living with a spinal cord injury. So what do we do at Praxis? So we are a Canadian-based non-for-profit organisation that leads global collaboration in spinal cord injury research, innovation and care. So we try to advance groundbreaking ideas that can be put into practice to really make the lives of people living with spinal cord injury better. And we do that by bridging health evidence with real-world delivery, and we work to make exceptional improvements in the health of people living with spinal cord injury. So our vision is a world without paralysis, and we take a collaborative approach to maximise our impact. And you can really see that with the internal kind of makeup of our organisation, where we have kind of a very diverse number of experts working in the field, such as myself as a clinician. We have the commercialization team, and then we have the real world, real life perspective of the consumers who are actually living with spinal cord injury themselves. And this enables us to move the most promising ideas out of the laboratory into standard of practice of care, into the marketplace, and ultimately into the hands of need it most. So one of the key partnerships that we have is working with UBC's Biomedical Engineering Department, and that, like I said, that's through the Engineers and Scrubs initiative. And so this initiative started back in 2018. With a programme really training some of Canada's most talented biomedical engineering students to work quite uniquely, work directly with end users and clinicians to solve problems that improve outcomes for those with a chronic or costly conditions such as spinal cord injury. And such problems could be focused on many different issues, and that could be around maintaining skin health, managing pain, improving mobility, and overall access to the community. And really what we're trying to do is look at meaningful ways to improve or improve the person's quality of life. So how we collaborate with engineers and scrubs. So we tend to go through a process, and initially we collate ideas and problems from the SCI community and provide education, but we don't provide the solution, we just provide the problem. But by collating the ideas from the SCI community, we can ensure that the problems are actually relevant and current to some of the issues faced either in the clinical setting or consumers today. But the challenges really need to be realistic and feasible within the time frame of the project, or the programme, sorry. But what's quite unique to this programme is that people have that ongoing feedback loop with the people that this issue is directly affecting, and it really helps the students to break down the problem or the issue into the core components, and to identify the essential details for the device to be successful. We also provide educational sessions to the students, So they really have a good understanding and insight into the challenges faced by a person living with spinal cord injury. And alongside that, it helps the students understand what the problems we're presenting, kind of what they are and what the issue is, as well as what the potential impact of solving those issues might be. After we've presented those initial problems, the students go back and do some market research, and we help to refine the problem statements. The students will often do an environmental scan or a needs assessment, but through the lens of a biomedical engineer. And we help provide insight into that needs assessment to really give them a greater context around the potential impact of that solution, whether that be quality of life or the cost saving for the individual or the healthcare system, or whether it be safer care, or really just to bridge a gap in the market. And through this process, we can also provide feedback on what's been tried in the past and what's currently available, but what are the current limitations with the current solution, if there is one available, such as why is it not being used? Is that because it's costly, whether it's not widely available, whether it's too complex, or whether it's just not user-friendly? And then lastly, once we've gone through that process, we provide ongoing support and feedback to the students. And that might not just be ourselves. We can also pull upon our partners and the community that we're connected to really bring in the subject matter experts to really target the problem that they're currently working on. And it can provide the information needed to guide the engineering, the students through the process and ensure it's successful. So why are programs like these important? Well, like I said before, it's a very unique program in that you can collaborate directly with the end user, meaning there's a continuous feedback loop. And that really means that meaningful solutions are created that have a real world impact. These engineering answers are to relevant problems to either the clinician or the consumer. And what that means, it gives the clinical or consumer validation. So the process of that feedback, like I said, through either the clinician providing feedback or the consumer, or validating the end product. Is it actually fit for purpose? Is it actually doing what it's designed to do? And the program improves the lives of patients through bridging the gap between really the person that's going to be using it and the person designing it. And the program really gives students space to think outside of the box. And really, it can also help healthcare professionals with more efficient or safer patient care, depending on what the problem or the solution that's being created. So how can biomedical engineering advance clinical care? So there's an ever-increasing role and reliance on technology. And this is not just for spinal cord injury, but for all other health conditions as well. And we're really seeing a greater emphasis on personalized medicine with the integration of artificial intelligence to aid decision making. And we're really seeing that much more in healthcare today. And care needs are becoming more complex as people are living longer, and technology is helping support that. We're also seeing that there's greater self-advocacy and awareness around what technology is currently available. And we're often seeing that commercial technology is widely more available today, and people are accessing that through the use of things like Siri and Alexa at home, and people be able to operate these technologies very easily. But there's a really bit of a gap between what commercial technology is available and what's actually being used in healthcare today. And with more solutions, we're seeing the production of tangible solutions that can improve the quality of life and independence of people living with spinal cord injury. So now I'm just going to hand it off to Chris, who is actually going to share one of the devices that was created through the Engineers and Scrubs program.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, so last year we came up with some community sourced issues that people experienced and kind of filtered through them and then presented problem sets to the Engineers and Scrubs class. And one of the teams picked up this one and ran with it and is actually still going with it. It's been almost a year now. We still meet occasionally. And so this was a discrete urinary collection and drainage system, because I'll just use my personal lived experience. I can't get up and run to the washroom, so I got to deal with that somehow. And we want dignity and discretion, autonomy, and a sanitary solution to dealing with collection bags. And it's difficult to independently manage the bags for individuals with limited hand function. Case in point, myself with a C5 injury, that there's no dexterity in the fingers anymore. So move the slide ahead. I think, yeah, so here's an example of a kind of a concept they came up with. You got your collection going in the shorts, and then you got your drainage going out. So they broke it down to two parts: a collection system and then a drainage system. And they came up with a wearing on the body versus strapped down the leg, because we're thinking of say a user who's say a young female in a wheelchair that wants to wear capris or a dress and doesn't want their leg bag shown to the public, and how do you manage with that? So we click through on this slide here. So they came up with a pair of undergarments with the collection bag sewn into a pocket in there, so it could be discreet, worn under clothing, and not visible for other people to see. And if we click through to the next slide, here's an example of one of the students wearing the collection shorts, and how it interfaces kind of stealthily and with the wheelchair, using this one as an example. So you can see there's a little battery for powering it, because they were talking about having a pump for the drainage system, where instead of just like a gravity feed, which I thought was very ingenious. And some hidden tubing, black, so it's discreet, and then a way to let that drain out on the wheelchair. So we'll go through the next slide. So here we have innovation. And so innovation never starts with one person. There's always a team involved. And as we click through here, I can show the case for that. So say an innovator is collecting something or has an idea to help somebody, that uses a wheelchair for mobility. So they'd be consulting with a physiotherapist as to how that would roll out, and an occupational therapist to see what needs need to be considered there. And then they might be also discussing with an engineer to say design solutions to the problem with the feedback from the physio and the occupational therapist. And they'll probably need to consult with a materials or metals expert to see what materials would be best for what usages. And that might lead into manufacturing. And the piece in the middle is the person with lived experience needs to be consulted all the way through, because like as Jessica said before, that maps out into meaningful outcomes, as long as that the end result maps out to something that the knowledge user is going to need. So their input to help guide that process, as like say with the engineers and scouts program, we're meeting continually as they refine ideas and we kind of bounce it back and forth. So it's very important. Innovation doesn't exist in isolation or with one person. It's kind of the point of that. And I thought we have a next slide, or is that straight to commercialization with Andrew? Yeah, so let Andrew, oh wait, no, it's actually, I'll go on with the consumer engagement team here first. So this is some of us at Praxis, and it's a very heterogeneous injury. And so there's a collection of people with 5 to 40 years of experience. And just very quickly, not to go too far deep into it, but so you can have a spinal injury. Two people, like say myself and Sam Douglas, have what's called a C5 injury in the cervical vertebrae, but I can't walk and he can a bit. And there can be differences in sensory and motor through all of those. So what works for one user may not work for another. That's why it's good to have a variety of perspectives. And we focus on knowledge translation and equitable care and Indigenous engagement. And we work closely with EIS teams to provide user feedback and assist with the prototype validation through to end user engagement. And I believe this is where I hand off to Andrew, because these can lead to pathways to commercialization.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So I think depending on where you're at with your BME undergrad, you'll know that medical technology has two very significant valleys of death that tend to hamper new technologies and new innovations. So we find in the SCI space, it takes about 14 years to get from bench, an idea that pops into your head, to actually being on the market. And so what we've done on our commercialization side is, next slide, is kind of look at the valleys of death and provide support for it. Where our vision for the commercialization program is, supporting SCI innovation across the continuum. And what we really measure our success is that we're moving these ideas forward as they still have value for the communities. So what we have here is 3 programs. Our first is what we do on the ideation level. So we have a nationwide SCI Ideation Challenge and programs like the EIS, where we work with individuals with a concept stage of their developments, really low TRL numbers. And then as it progresses into something further, we have an Incubate program and an Accelerate program to help companies navigate the issues that are the reasons for those valleys of death. We find with the development side and then the regulatory side, it's when innovations tend to be a little bit more cash strapped, but also resource strapped. And it takes a lot of work to move through those and a lot of expertise. So we try and provide as much of that in our Incubate and Accelerate programs to move things forward. Next slide. The other thing that we focus on, and Jessica and Chris talked about this as well, is we want to be as impactful as possible. So for us, it's looking at projects and innovations that really have high to medium impact on functionality, the quality of life, and secondary complications of people with SCI. A lot of people, when they think of spinal cord injury, they just focus on the mobility and robotics. And what Jessica and Chris talked about is the other concerns and the other issues affecting quality of life. And we see those as important focus areas, those being neuropathic pain, neurorestoration, bladder and bowel control, and pressure injuries. So really we're focusing on improvement in all areas, including mobility, but really looking at what's going to have the most impact. Next slide. And on a positive note, one thing to also think about is these are large markets. So we're also supporting things that are going to be impactful, but also have the potential to grow into large economic opportunities. So for individuals getting into BME and wanting to go further, a lot of the companies that are going to come out of this are coming out with solutions to new ways of doing catheters, new ways of tackling pressure injuries, or especially neuropathic pain. It's not just people who have SCI who encounter these secondary complications. It's a lot of other individuals with other concerns. So there's a huge impact that is there, but it's also there's a huge amount of money that can be made to benefit individuals. So we really do encourage people to look beyond just SCI, but to look at these concerns. One of the things that we do find is that a lot of the solutions in these markets are maybe a bit dated, and there's a lot of technical innovations in other sectors that can be moved into biomedical that can be really useful and really open up a lot of benefit and impact for people. Next slide. This is more to visualize just what our commercialization programs do, and from a TRL perspective. So from really what we're doing is trying to move individuals as much as possible through what we are trying to create as like a pipeline to move you through really early TRL levels of 0 and 1 to 2 with early concepts to our Incubate program, which is early stage companies like pre-prototype, trying to get those with as much clinical and individual validation as possible. And then through our Accelerate program, which is really once the companies have a prototype, really validating that and then seeing how they can move through the really complicated regulatory and reimbursement models that Canada and other countries have. Next slide. The other, so first in our pipeline, and one that you can all get involved in, is our Praxis SCI Ideation Challenge. This is a collaboration that we run out of the University of Toronto, and it's open to all undergrad and grad students across Canada. It's starting in January. We've done 2 workshops, but bi-weekly there will be a program of seminars and workshops starting in January that are really focused on business development in biomedical technology and biomedical innovation. So what this program does is it works with individuals who either, they've got a project or a concept or something that they really think might benefit the community, or they just have an idea, or they want to learn a bit more. And so we're working with teams of undergrad and grad students who have that idea, or taking individuals and then pairing them with other individuals from other leading universities across Canada and also some in North America, and then really helping them develop those with these hands-on workshops, as well as getting people to develop those ideas. So we have pitch-off events, and it all leads up to a demo day, so that if you have a concept that pops out of this presentation or another one where it's an issue dealing or would benefit individuals living with SCI, I'd highly recommend coming into this program, because it really is to foster going really from an academic to looking at how you can develop that into a business. Next slide. Sorry, Jess. Oh, you did. And then there are two big commercialization programs that we run internally that I've spoken about. So there are SCI Incubate and our SCI Accelerate programs. They're both of differing size, but 4-month program for Incubate, and we are really looking at pre-prototype research projects with a focus on SCI. And what we do is we, weekly have connections with SCI consumers and SCI researchers to validate, the product that they're kind of conceptually still developing, and then giving them some mentorship as well about how they could be developing this so that it's easier to get to the market, so that they have their IPL set up. And so they're able to also fundraise money to continue with the project. And then with our Accelerate, it's a more mature companies. They've already kind of developed what their prototype's going to look like. And it's really about focus of how their technology can most benefit the SCI community. So it is still weekly conversations with our consumer team and our clinical team. But then a lot of it is an additional work on making sure that they are getting into the marketplace and that they are being reimbursed, so that individuals who are going to purchase this have it reimbursed. One thing that some people kind of overlook when they think about biomedical engineering is you're selling things directly onto the marketplace, whereas a lot of this is you're selling it to a person, but they are getting it funded in some other way. Next slide. And this just kind of gives you a scope of how much time we're putting into each company. So we are providing, from those incubate companies, they're getting 100 hours of training, and we're providing $25,000 to go to funding for those projects. So we do our goal is to see 3 new products from these companies hitting the market by 2030, which is fairly ambitious. And for our Accelerate program, it's even more training, because we do find that to get a lot of the regulatory and reimbursement stuff sorted and in place, it really requires a lot of one-on-one mentorship with our large network of individuals and our consumer team and our clinical teams. We provide more funding because of all that extra work. And then what we do to accomplish this as well is it is building partnerships within a broader community, so that we can ensure that the best experts are working with each of our companies. So we work with many universities across North America and internationally as well. And then with other accelerators like Critter Destruction Labs, Genome BC, and the Ontario Brain Institute, so that we can be collaborating on directing people and make sure that they're working collaboratively on solving problems. Last slide. And then I wanted to share some achievements. One is that one of the EIS projects from a couple of years ago is currently a company in our SCI Incubate program. To some sense at the top, they are working on they're working on a technology to target pressure injuries and detect pressure injuries. So it's a really great success for us to see, that the first ideation type of program like EIS is able to foster companies that are then going to incubate, and we hope to see them continue on that progress. The other is one of our SCI incubate companies, really early stage, just raised $5 million within 6 months of our program, kind of identifying that the value add that we're providing to these companies is quite high. And then 3 of our Accelerate companies have already had products into the market. So we're already seeing individuals benefiting from the work that we're providing. And then lastly is just about, we're doing again about the SCI Ideation Challenge. If you are sparked by this presentation or want to get a little bit more hands-on workshops and seminars on how medical technology enters the marketplace and how to really think about best practices for developing biomedical technology, I would highly recommend entering this. It is, bi-weekly, and it's only about 1.5 hours every 2 weeks. And I think it would be a huge benefit as you're thinking about what to do with your grad school. So that's everything for me. And I will just open it up for questions. And Chris, you are right. It's 17 years. It's 14 years for a different stat in my mind.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, we will be welcome to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you for that awesome presentation. I do have a question. I was wondering what the requirements are for people that want to go into these programs, like the Ideation program and then the one beyond that.
So the Ideation program is open to any undergrad students, and it's just through that website you can enter. They'll ask you if you've got an idea or a concept already, or if you're just open to focusing on something. So it is just an open registration. The Incubate and Accelerate programs are for research projects, fairly advanced research projects, or companies. And so we have a registration process that opens up every 2 months before each of those programs.
I had a question. Do you often hire like summer students or summer research students or co-op students at Praxis?
We do, yes, we do, but mainly kind of in the research department, looking at specific research projects. So if you were interested in that, then we can certainly connect with you. I don't know if anyone else has got their hand up or there's any other questions.
I think there's one in the chat here.
Oh, is there? Sorry,
Yeah.
I can't see that. Sorry, I can't, the way that my presenter views, I don't know if Andrew, could you read it out for me, for us?
Yeah. The question is, what technical and soft qualities and skills does Praxis look for within potential student hires for the research side?
So it really depends on the project that we're looking for that support with. So it can just be, like I said, as a summer student, as via, if they're in a graduate program or an undergraduate program, and really what what program they're currently studying in, and the needs of our kind of project and what that person can offer for the actual project. So it really is tailored towards what current things are working on and the programs are working on, and how, whether that be with statistical support or whether that be with data analysis. So it really just depends on the program that we're supporting at that point, or the project, sorry, that we're supporting at that point.
I have another question. I know that market viability is often a big obstruction for spinal cord research. How do you do that market analysis and come up with the figure of how many people will be affected by this, or how big you think the market will be to evaluate specific projects? Can you give us some more insight into that process, I guess?
Andrew, have you got anything in terms of your experience with the commercialization team?
So what we usually do at Praxis is we run a fairly large survey and clinical research data, kind of like aggregates called Risker. And what we do from there is reports and studies come out kind of identifying the scope and the number of individuals who have certain conditions, both primary and secondary. And that kind of gives us a basis for like extrapolating out based on the number of people who have SCI in certain communities, what that would look like and what the impact could be.
Yeah, so just to build off that, we have a huge, one of the key projects that we have on within Praxis is the RIC Hands and Spinal Cord Injury Registry. And so we collect data from people from the moment they have their injury all the way out into the community. And that really gives, I think at the moment we've got over 8,000 participants that have been enrolled in that research study. It's a longitudinal research study. And as Andrew mentioned, it kind of gives us a kind of finger on the pulse of what's going on and how the changes in the demographics and the kind of in terms of aging and the type of injury that people are sustaining and the complications that people are seeing long after kind of they've had their injury. But then that kind of gives us an idea of the kind of lay of the land of what the problems people are facing at this time. But then also we do get feedback from, we've got strong ties to not just the research side, but the clinical side. And we have an international reach. And so we're able to get feedback from our kind of clinical partners, research partners, and then also on the commercialization team side as well, feedback from our connections through that as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you. That's a really smart way to go about it. So that's good to hear.
I had another question as well. I was wondering, you mentioned that like some of the barriers are like complexity and like cost and not making solutions like user friendly to adopting those solutions. So I was wondering which one of those you think like teams have the most challenge with. Is it like cost or the complexity of designs?
So from a clinical perspective, I always say it's quite sad to say that often you'll get the most intrigue once you're able to show a cost benefit, or not just a cost benefit, a patient safety benefit, or really those seem to trump most of the when you're looking at terms of barriers, particularly if I'm thinking from where my perspective of being on a very acute setting. If you can show a cost benefit or a patient safety benefit to the device, that tends to be the most one of the kind of the winner formula, really. In terms of usability, that does often come into play, and also the accessibility of it. You know, if it's only being offered in kind of, I don't know, one region or one country, or you're not able to distribute the product widely, then it won't really be used that much. But the user-friendly part, I think you can somewhat get around in terms of smart design, but if you're making something that's super expensive, that won't, the healthcare system, just particularly in the Canadian healthcare system, which wouldn't be able to support.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know, Andrew, if you had any experience with the commercialization team around some of the barriers, other barriers that the companies have faced?
So I think one thing that we, different people have say different experiences here, but one thing we find incredibly valuable with what we're providing is that person first refocusing of how to develop technology. So anyone here who's done a business 101 or entrepreneurship class, it's, your iterative way of developing a product as you develop it, you give it to people, they tell you what's wrong with it, you fix it, and you keep doing it that way. And with some types of medical research, it's not designed to be that way. It's much more designed to be impartial and unbiased and developed within a lab with like control groups. What we're really doing is refocusing individuals after they've come through the lab to find how their research can benefit the community the most. And so it's refocusing their technology and their business on the individuals who have SCI. That's why in Chris's presentation, we call it the consumer team. These are the individuals who are the consumers of this. So really going back and putting them in touch and talking every week is really our way of being iterative in their development and process. So always thinking, even if it's not SCI, if it's another condition, it's just really thinking about how is the person who has this going to be affected by it and impacted by it, and also not thinking that you know the answer to that and going and asking someone who is there. So a lot of when we're doing a recruitment for our Incubate, we are asking tracking how they have talked to that community, how they've worked with that community, because if they've essentially come up with this great solution that isn't really a solution, or even really haven't talked to anyone. So it is really valuable to always be talking to individuals who are your consumers, who are going to be using your product.
I think there's a couple more questions in the chat. I don't know, Andrew, if you want to ask those or answer those.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew, just where my screen is shared, I can't see those.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I'll go to Kelvin's question. Kelvin asked, do we need to have some sort of business background if we want to and get involved in the projects? Really bluntly, the answer is no. A lot of what we're doing is providing individuals who have a specific skill set, especially skill set in engineering, research, and academia, who may not know the business side. And so there is always that transition about like how to go from being really good at engineering to being really good at business, and melding the two. So no, the business background is absolutely not required for this. In fact, with ideation, that's a lot of what the focus is to provide really the idea of how undergrads can think about moving any ideas that they have within their fields of study into becoming businesses. So it's not a business degree, it's more just like some business training and business workshops.
Yeah, and for the Engineers and Scrubs program, it's just it's a graduate program, so I believe you can just apply for it.
Ali asked, is Praxis more clinically oriented or research oriented, or are there opportunities for both?
Interesting question. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, Praxis has quite a unique setup in that we try to incorporate the lens of kind of a 360 perspective of found spinal cord injury. So we do look at the research side, and we do have an extensive research team. And like I said, one of our biggest research projects is the registry that we collect data on people with spinal cord injury. But we also have the clinical team, and the clinical team works very, very closely with the research team as well. So really the idea is that we bridge that perspective from the clinical world, bring it to the research team so they fully understand, or they have that insight from a clinical perspective. So we do work very, very closely, both the research team and the clinical team. And our clinical team doesn't just have myself. We've got two OTs and one physiotherapist that's also on the team. But then alongside the clinical and research team, we also have, like I said, the consumer team. And we have 5 people that are actually living with spinal cord injury themselves, who give such valuable insight into all the projects that we do to really make sure what we're doing is actually impacting the people which it's affecting. And then lastly, we do have the commercialization team that's looking at that innovation process and expediting that process. And it's really, we work interchangeably, we work across teams, really to give, like I said, that full perspective on that kind of spinal cord injury environment or picture.
Her follow-up question would also like to know about opportunities for engineers within the organization.
So I think the main opportunities will come through the commercialization program. But we do have within the research department, we have a machine learning branch as well that's just been kind of established. So we do have various different opportunities post graduating, but in terms of following a kind of biomedical engineering career, you would the most opportunities around it in the commercialization team, like Andrew's discussed, but also working with us through the Engineers and Scrubs program. So we're heavily involved with that program from the offset.
Yeah, a lot of from the commercialization side, we don't employ engineers, we support engineers as they develop their programs and their projects. So that's kind of where I think there's a great opportunity to think of BME as a potential for an entrepreneurial background. Is a lot of the teams we do have researchers or engineers on them, as well as business people. So their teams are kind of constitute those three areas.
Yeah, and from a lived experience here, Chris just chiming in, it's I wondered when I was hired, I said, how do I fit in all this? And they said, well, you're hired for your MBA and lived experience. And then when we started asking questions, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm in a chair 18 hours a day, so this isn't going to work. You have to look at this. And I found there was a lot of stuff that I had input on that mattered to the outcomes of different products. And like I say, with the different mix of spinal injuries and presentations, just even on the consumer team and in our wider community, we can get a very rounded kind of picture of what won't work, and sometimes places need to pivot. So it all works together.
So an earlier question was, what's the coolest project you've seen go through Incubate programs? I see that Chris typed one in, that's nanotest, which is a current one that we have in our program, and he put a link. I'm going to share one that I think you might all find really interesting from our first cohort. It's spider warts, and they're doing neural scaffolding. And I just sent a video where one of their founders is describing using asparagus to potentially build spinal cord. So with this, it's really showing our Incubate is very early stage. This is not something that has built a spinal cord in human or even been able to go towards human trials yet, or in human trials. So it's really early stage. And just to say, if you have just the notion of an idea, there's support there within your universities to move that forward. And then we're here once you've started getting some research data showing some impact, that we can then move that forward even further. But really cool to think about that sort of way of potentially rebuilding an entire spinal cord from, or parts of the spinal cord from, asparagus or other things.
What was cool about that one was it was just the asparagus plant scaffold with no therapeutics, no activity-based therapy, no gene therapy, nothing. And so that was a really neat video in that one. So yeah, there's a lot of them, like they're all really neat. So my personal favorite isn't reflective of what's best, but yeah, you take a look around and you see some stuff there, and some might resonate with you.
Any last minute questions? We're just wrapping up.
Great. Well, if there's no more questions, we'll wrap it up. And again, I just want to say thank you to everyone and the invitation to come speak to you today. We can always connect over email if there's any more questions that people have.
Awesome. Thank you for coming.
No, thank you for having us. Okay, bye everyone.